All righty, welcome. I am Heather Pierce Campbell, the legal website warrior. I'm an attorney and legal coach based here in Seattle, Washington, and serving entrepreneurs throughout the US and the world. I am so excited to bring you another episode of Guts, Grit, and Great Business. And today I've got Annie Schuessler. And Annie, I should have asked you before we started, what's the correct pronunciation? Because I can do it again.
You said it perfectly.
Yes.
And I'm
Okay.
so excited to be with you, Heather.
Awesome. Well, welcome to Annie. This is going to, especially if you are in the world of being a professional or you've got a licensed profession that you engage in, this is going to be a really fabulous conversation for you. And even if you're not in that world and you are figuring out how to get online, how to create maybe your first course or program, you're going to have a lot of fun. This will be relevant to anybody in the online space, but particularly people that are transitioning there. So, for those of you that don't know Annie, Annie Schuessler is a business coach and the host of the podcast Rebel Therapist Podcast. With her Rebel Therapist programs, she helps therapists, healers, and coaches make an impact beyond a traditional private practice. So, Annie is a therapist herself. She has been running a successful private practice for 20 years and has been mentoring other therapists in their business for 10 years. When she started out in private practice, she struggled. She struggled with mindset around money, not knowing how to build a private practice, and felt anxious about her business. At times, she believed the discouraging things she heard from others about private practice. But she got to the other side of that and created a business way beyond what she used to imagine. She does not want you to go through the same struggle, and she wants you to tap into your potential right away. So, Annie now specializes in helping therapists and people that are in similar business models transition to the online space, get out of the traditional box of therapy, and do some really interesting and creative things in the online world. Annie lives in San Francisco Bay Area with her wife and two children. Welcome, Annie.
Thank you so much, Heather. I'm so excited to talk to you and to dive
Yes.
in.
So exciting. Well, and for those of you that can't see us, because obviously we're recording using a video, you're hearing the audio version, but Annie has a lovely background and was just telling me that her wife makes these amazing neon signs, which is fabulous. She's got one of those hanging right behind her. Very cool.
Yeah, I'm
So,
so lucky.
well, it's really fun. It's really nice when you have a unique background, which you do. So it makes it fun to look at. So Annie, talk to us. I'd love to hear about what drew you into a therapy practice to begin with.
Absolutely. So I always felt really fascinated with deeper conversations, and I
Mm.
always wanted to ask the nosy questions and really dig under the surface. And I'm pretty bad at small talk. And so pretty quickly I realized that I should explore therapy and that these people, I
Mm.
was in therapy from a really young age. I struggled with depression, I struggled with anxiety.
Mm.
And I realized this is a really cool job that they're doing. And I want to learn how to do that. I want to learn how to help people heal, help people live with the difficulties that they have going on, and have
Mm.
these really deep conversations. So that's what drew me in the first place. And then having my own private practice came up because I was working in an agency and I realized I was just kind of scribbling on the back of an envelope like you do,
Mm.
realizing, okay, so if I were to start my own business, how many clients would I need to have to make this work out? And like, how much freedom might that give me to work however I want to work? And there is sort of this rebel inside of me. And so that
Mm-hmm.
rebel was like, yeah, I think I need to run my own show here. And
Mm-hmm.
and so I started stepping into private practice.
Mm. Well, it's so fascinating the piece that you say around not really liking or being able to do small talk. It reminds me, because I think I recognize that type of personality. I have one of my closest childhood friends, actually. She's been a close friend since third grade. And I laugh because we only get each other in really small doses. She's a busy mom. She's actually a pediatrician, lives several states away. We've seen each other like a handful of times over the years, but when we connect, it's always like awesome, right?
Hmm.
And we were chatting recently, and she was like, "Yeah, I just can't do small talk. Phone conversations are hard because
Mm.
like she wants to get right to the juicy stuff. She wants to know about all the hard things going on. And just like you said, like how to help, how to heal, how to be even just a listener and a witness for those kinds of journeys so that, you're not doing, for lack of a better term, even though it's not entirely how I feel about small talk, but it's not like this surface level living, right? It's like you're
Yeah.
really digging down into the juicy stuff. And so I love that you're just able to come out and say that, because I really think that is a hard thing for certain personality types.
Yeah. And I think it's really important for those of us who don't have that gift to know that. And then also to be around people who do. So I know like my
Mhm.
sister and my wife, they are so, and a lot of my good friends, they're really gifted at being able to connect right away
Mhm.
and jump into really an enjoyable connecting talk with someone.
Mhm.
And so I like to sit near them so that I get to meet interesting people.
But don't you think, I mean, I'm curious, don't you think it helps to actually say it out loud though, to
Oh
share with
yeah.
people? Like I don't really do, because then it provides people with an understanding of like, oh, okay, some additional context about just like the way that you operate or walk through the world. And I think to the extent that any of us can identify those things about ourselves that help other people understand us better, right? I think it
Oh,
actually helps
totally.
that connection.
I think you're right. And like, it's kind of like handing someone a handbook
Yes.
about yourself and saying, like, not great at small talk, like, would love to talk about whatever's going on in your life in a deep way. And like, now I could add to that for the last 10 or 15 years, like, would love to dig into your business with you and ask you questions about like revenue and business model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so funny you talking about, I think you mentioned the word nosy, like you really like to dig down into, and this same friend will ask me like a quick question, and then another one. Like texting with her is very funny because it's like, wait, I can't stop with a question. Should I stop? Is there such a thing as like not asking questions? Do people do that? It's really fun. But
Nice.
I would say that, being on the receiving end of that, people, I think in general, especially if they know who you are and how you approach things, really feel cared for, whether
Hmm.
in the therapy role or not. So the fact that, you were drawn to that field, I think is not a surprise hearing about the way that you prefer to operate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just like you, I have a podcast. And so I get to gear the way that I interview to my
Mhm.
strengths. And
Right.
yeah, and that's really fun too. I think you're
Yeah.
right. It's also about not having shame about our individual technology, like how we work in the
Yeah.
world, but letting people know about it and then trying to go with it.
I agree. Well, it's really fun that I love the rebel part of yourself as well. I want to hear more about that. Like you were in this, it sounds like you said agency practice, which I just imagine to be like a group practice or something, kind of a set model. Recognize that some part of it wasn't working for you. Can you talk more about that? Like what prompted the back of the napkin type of scribbling?
Yeah. So I worked for this agency. It was called New Leaf, and it was an agency for queer folks, run by queer folks. And it was beautiful. And
Mm-hmm.
in any organization, in any agency, you've got to make a lot of decisions by committee, right? Like you don't get to
Mm,
just decide, hey, I think this would work better. I'm going to implement it today. And that's kind of how I like to do things.
yeah.
So the agency itself was beautiful. And I realized that for my personality, it works better to be able to pivot really quickly, experiment with things quickly. And I don't think we're all suited to work in large groups or in
Mm-hmm.
large organizations. And I'm definitely one of those people who I work better on a really small team or by myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a former mentor in law, and I had worked on several. I launched my own practice right out of law school, but I
Yeah.
assisted on some really large projects with different firms around Seattle, and um, I worked for a time with this one firm where the founder, one of the original founders, faced that same thing. Like all these
Mm.
decisions by committee were just killing him. Like he hated it, even though he loved the people, he loved the work. Like this not having the ability to quickly pivot. And so he actually asked me to help him build a whole separate team. He ended up leaving that firm,
Mm.
creating a smaller kind of boutique firm, but he always called himself after that the benevolent dictator. And he recognized he just needed to be able to make decisions and have those made and move very quickly, and anything short of that just did not work for him. So again,
Yeah.
somebody recognizing their boundaries and acting on it and saying it out loud, and it totally changed courses for them. So the transition out of the agency model into your own practice, can you share? Because I'm sure there are some folks listening that are like, yeah, like I'm either there, right? I want to be doing my own thing, and then there's going to be next level, those who are already practicing on their own but really want to be expanding beyond that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the starting of my private practice was challenging financially.
Mm,
I really didn't have a sense of how to run a business that was profitable. I didn't have a sense yet. I knew I wanted to make my own decisions, but I wasn't great yet at charging enough or at niching. I don't
mm,
even know that I would have had the word niching at that
right,
moment. I just wanted to help people
right.
and I just dove right in. But I struggled with charging enough. I struggled with figuring out how to run it as a business. And I think I had that nonprofit kind of mode in my bones at that point. And so I was kind of running my private practice like a nonprofit for one person. And so there was a huge learning curve in just understanding business fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to work with coaches, read a lot of books. And at that point, I started to kind of catch the bug of really being fascinated with business, just like I
Mm-hmm.
had been fascinated with psychology. So that learning really never stopped. And I started sharing what I was learning with my colleagues, with my peers. And so that's how the business coaching part of my
Mm.
life started up, was just like me learning and then me wanting to share it and then noticing uh, as I was talking to my friends about business and wanting to help them, we would hit a certain point where some of my friends were like, can we not talk about this anymore? It's enough. And I kind of look back on that as a signal that I also encourage other people to look for, is like, what are you talking about or wanting to talk about so much that the people around you are kind of up to here with it? And that means that might be something you need to pursue in a bigger way.
Mm. The I want to go back to it's funny now looking back on it, but this whole like this concept of operating like a nonprofit, kind of
Yes.
being in your bones. I think the irony is that first of all, so many service can't even talk, professionals that I know are that way.
Hmm.
They're helpers, so
Yeah.
many of us that go into a profession, I think, are deep down helpers. And
Yes.
really any businesses, we are all here to solve problems, but particularly the niche that I serve, coaches,
Mm.
consultants, service professionals, like the vast majority of those folks, I call them heart-centered entrepreneurs. They just want
Yes.
to do their best work and help people. And the business fundamentals, while some of them have some of those skills naturally, most don't. Most
Yes.
have to learn. Most have to kind of piece things together along the way, right? But there is that point you have to hit of really knowing how to value what you're doing in a way that you
Hmm.
can create a business around it. Otherwise, you stay in
Yes.
a really hard, painful place, right?
Oh, yeah. And I've seen so many people, including therapists, but also friends I have who do different things like landscape design,
Hmm.
where this is how I set it up in the beginning. It's like they set it up so that if everything goes perfectly, they will be able to pay their bills and they'll have a good enough salary. And I know that's what I was doing on the back of that envelope. It's like, what do I just
Mm,
absolutely need to make this work? And then one of the problems with that is that everything doesn't go perfectly.
yeah.
And if we don't build in some room for breaks and some room for things not to go perfectly, we're kind of always going to be in that mode of like, why is this not quite working? Why is it not quite bringing in enough revenue? And why am I overworking? And
Mm,
usually the answer, I know this was true for me, is that the business isn't actually designed to be profitable. So it's doing a
mm,
good job doing what it was designed to do, but it's not really, it doesn't have profit built into it.
yeah. Oh, that concept of business design is such a juicy one. The the point where you kind of caught the bug for
Mhm.
reading about business. So I joke, and I've said this several times on my podcast. Basically, the only books that I read are like self-development or business books my entire life, right? That's it. And my husband is constantly like, and he's into sci-fi and fantasy, like, read something fun. And I'm like, this is fun. So I know all about the business book bug. What was the most transformational reading for you in that process?
Well, in that time, I read the first book I read was by Lynn Grodsky, who was like, as far as I know, one of the very first business coaches for therapists in particular.
Hmm.
And so she had a beautiful book about, which would be, honestly pretty dated at this point, but it has beautiful business fundamentals built into it. And she had a workbook, and I walked through that and just loved it. And then over time, I started, and Casey Truffaut was another one of those really early, fabulous business coaches for therapists. So I devoured her work. And then I also started getting into business books, not for therapists.
Hmm.
And that's been really fun. That's been just, I mean, it sounds like we should have a book group together. That's
Oh,
been
totally.
delightful to like look at what people in other industries are thinking and then
Yes.
applying it to our industries.
Yes. No, it is. I do the same. Most of the books that I read are not at all about the legal profession, and every
Mm-hmm.
once in a while I will pick one up about the and it's always like, "Oh, yeah, those are some good ideas too," you know.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's so many different insights and ways to approach building a business. And certainly there are some fundamentals and some things that we all have to learn, but it's just, I don't know, there's nothing for me more powerful than being able to absorb the amount of information that can be shared in a book that
Yeah.
can really drastically change your mind about things.
I love it. And I bet you do the same thing I do. It's like partly I'm reading these, I mean, mostly because I geek out on this stuff and I love it. And then I'm also reading so that my clients who don't actually want to read all these books can benefit. So they can get, my ideas that not my ideas, they can get the ideas of these authors and apply them to their businesses too.
Yeah, it's true. I joke that my clients get that whether they want it or not.
Yep.
kind of like that point you mentioned, which I loved, asking your clients, like, what are you talking about so much that other
Mm.
people are telling you, stop? That's probably a sign, right? To
Yeah.
follow their true north. So at what point did you transition? It sounds like you were starting to like really get into reading books, talking about, business building stuff and sharing that with a group of colleagues and friends. Take us from there through kind of the evolution of your business, because now you really serve, not exclusively, because I know you've got people outside of the therapy group, but take us back a few years through the early years of that business transition.
Yeah. So I hit a point where I wanted to really give some energy to my business coaching, and it was time to start carving out that space from my therapy practice. And so that was, like it is for so many people, that was a bit of a painful process of, not taking on new clients, just carving out that
Mm-hmm.
space for what was next. And I developed a program first for therapists who wanted to build their private practices.
Mm-hmm.
And at first, it was just a one on one program, which I think is for most of us the very best way to get started, if not just stay there forever. And because one on one work is awesome.
Yeah.
And then I turned that into a small group program, and I was running that for years and having a really good time because I
Mm-hmm.
love to geek out on this stuff. And then I realized that, there is this inner rebel in me, and it showed up again in that a lot of the people who I was helping build their private practices were starting to say, I want to do something else with this. Like, I want to grow some kind of program, membership, retreat, workshop, like something else. And I found myself really drawn to helping them do that. And I
Mm-hmm.
had these skills from having built my coaching business that I was able to share with them. And so that's the pivot that I took a few years ago, was just to completely focus on helping people move their work into something that's not strictly a psychotherapy practice.
Yeah. In your experience working with folks, and I know you and I connected in our very first phone call and we had a chat about this. People, I have found that my clients that have been in the traditional therapy world have often been thinking about what comes next for a very long time.
Yeah.
Longer often than other clients sometimes that I work with, right? And I think my sense is that they care so much about the
Mhm.
work they're doing and the rules that apply. And obviously, anybody with a licensed, a license to practice whatever it is they're doing hopefully takes their work very seriously, right? You're a licensed professional, you've got generally rules of professional conduct and other regulations that you have to abide by. And so, as a group, I define them usually as a pretty careful bunch, which I
Mhm.
also really appreciate, because on the flip side of the coin, I feel like you've got folks running around in the coaching world that do not always belong there, right? So
Yeah.
I have a tremendous amount of appreciation for people that bring so much care to their work. Talk to me about what you've seen in working with your clients around that piece, whether it's, a little bit of resistance, whether it's, just really wanting to take the time to do it right. Part of me wonders if it's a little bit that perfectionist element, which I'm sure you
Mhm.
get in a lot of licensed professionals, right? What have you noticed?
Yeah, I notice just exactly what you said, that people who are, whether they're licensed or not, and especially if they're licensed, people who are drawn to this work are coming at it from such an ethical place, from such a responsible place, where they really want everything they put out there to be of the highest quality. They care about the transformation. They're not like 99% of the time, money isn't the biggest reason why they want
Mm-hmm.
to change what they're doing. It's something about freedom. Like it's something about wanting to work more creatively, wanting to use different parts of themselves, or they've got a bigger message they want to get out there. And yeah, they're really careful about it. And I, one of the first things that I do with people when they're creating their programs beyond private practice
Mm-hmm.
is to think about not actually burning their therapy license, but to imagine burning their therapy license so that they're at least making space for what is this next thing?
Mm-hmm.
What if you didn't have a therapy license, if you didn't have to worry about it, just in your imagination for a moment, what would this next thing be so that they can allow themselves to dream into it?
Mm-hmm.
Because just like you said, they get so nervous at times that it's hard to even let their imagination go and dream into how they'd like to be working. And so that tends to work really well to get people freed up, dreaming, thinking about
Mm.
how they want to serve. And then we can circle back around and look at, okay, how are we going to parse this out? How are you going to
Mhm.
protect your license while also creating this new offer? But if they try to work it all out at the same time, they end up kind of stuck sometimes for
Yes.
years.
Yes. Well, and what I've noticed, because I've done a lot of speaking to groups that either contain therapists or have like a majority of therapists in the group, whether it's physical therapists, massage therapists, psychologists, they often will get to the point of like building out what it is that they want to do, having
Mm,
everything like ready to go. And then they're in this place of like, okay, the logistics feel bigger than I thought they would be, and
yeah.
they stop there. And so a lot of folks that I intersect with, they just need the solution from a legal perspective about how you do this the right way, because
Mm-hmm.
most of them also want to build a bridge over to the other side. They don't want to do this big dramatic leap, in my
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, okay, how do we help them build the bridge? And from a legal perspective, there's a really clear way that you do that, that you can keep your license safe over here and do this other educational, online information business over here. But there's definitely some set rules that apply that you have to know about. And once they get that information, it's like, ah, I can just see like it's like angels singing. They're like, oh my gosh, there's a path. Okay, and it is
Yeah.
so much relief. And so I'd be curious if your folks are like that, the bridge builders. They don't want to do the big dramatic leap, or are they the rebels that are doing the leaps, that are just saying goodbye to the therapy practice and just going for it?
The vast majority want to do both, at least for a period of time.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah. So
both
they're definitely
traditional
the,
therapy and
mhm.
then building a course or a program. Yeah.
Yeah. And I did that too. I actually just closed my therapy practice after 20 years, and it was it was a long bridge because it's
Yeah.
really hard to give up something so wonderful and
Yes.
meaningful. So
Yeah, and
I
for so long a
finally,
part of you, right? I think
yes.
for so many of us, our work feels like such a significant part of us. Like it's really closing a door on that chapter. How did that feel for
Yeah.
you? How did you decide to finally do that?
What I had imagined in the past was that I would just keep being a therapist forever, and I was
Mm-hmm.
down to just one morning a week at the end, and I was only working with folks who I had been working with for like 5 years or longer.
Mm.
So I just thought I'll just keep doing this as long as they want to stay in therapy. And then I hit a point of realizing it was kind of a Marie Kondo moment of realizing, this isn't really a fit for my life right now.
Mm.
And I am wanting to really simplify. Like I work 20 hours a week. It's really important to me to have that kind of balance in my life. And I realized that if I didn't have a therapy practice, I wouldn't go after one and get one now.
Yeah.
And so just like we do when we're trying to figure out what to do with precious objects. It was like, what would I do to get this thing now? And if I wouldn't do anything to get it, it's probably time to really carefully and lovingly say thank you and goodbye. And so
Mm.
that's what led me to that. It was really bittersweet,
Yeah.
but
Oh,
but
I
it
can
was a
imagine.
realizing, okay, I love this and I really want simplicity.
Yeah. Did you had your clients wrapped up, or did you have to say goodbye to some clients?
I had to say goodbye. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I started talking to them about it in the summer before so that we had like, almost a year to wrap things
Mm-hmm.
up.
Mm-hmm. And talk to me about the transition after that. How did you feel? You said it's bittersweet, but how did you process that transition?
Well, it was weird, Heather, because it happened. The transition wasn't planned to happen during COVID because COVID wasn't planned,
Uh,
but the transition happened right at the beginning of COVID. So
the
it was,
timing.
I think all of us, my clients and I, we were really thinking about like, what is this pandemic? How do we
Yeah.
deal with this? So it was a very weird
Yeah.
way for things to end.
Yeah.
But, a lot of love, a lot of care. And then I had a trip to Italy planned. I was going to go to
Hmm.
Italy for a couple months.
And Italy was like one of the
Yeah.
worst
Yeah, that
places
didn't
early
work out
on.
very well.
Yeah.
Yeah. My youngest son and I were going to live there for 2 months, and my
Oh,
wife and my older son were going to join us for a little bit in the
like a
middle.
big trip.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That was the plan. And,
Ah,
of course, I'm glad we didn't go, but also I'm really glad we planned it because I feel like I got half the enjoyment just from all the planning.
yeah, I feel like that could be a theme right now. Well, certainly in COVID, right? We
Yes.
we were all like daydreaming about what are we gonna do when this is over. But also as it relates to business, the
Yeah.
enjoyment from like even the kinds of questions you ask your clients of, if you did not have
Hmm.
a therapy practice, what would this other thing look like, right? I think
Yeah.
that kind of allow somebody to really feel into it in a much bigger way than, staying in the same place and line of thinking, which, you know, I think appropriately so in many circumstances. Licensed professions are rule bound professions,
Yes.
right? And it's just how they have to be to protect the public. But when you're talking about somebody really delivering to the world what they want to be delivering or teaching or doing, it could be very, very different. And sometimes you just have to really step out of those shoes to, I think, have the kind of creativity flow that allows you to imagine what comes next.
Yeah. And I do see some folks, even if what they imagined was that they were going to run both of these businesses long term, there
Mm-hmm.
are a lot of people who, once they create their unique online business, they start wanting to step away from the other
Yeah.
stuff and give that more energy. So I never push it, but I notice it happens a lot.
Yeah. Oh, I believe that. Well, and there's a couple things that I'm thinking about. One, I heard you say something about working way less hours, like you're down to 20
Hmm.
hours a week or something. I
Hmm.
want to hear more about that. And I want to dig in for a minute about the types of things that you cover. Give us a glimpse of the process that you walk your clients through when they're in kind of the, idea phase, or looking at that initial transition of creating something in the online world or creating a program or course. Walk us through a little bit what that looks like so that anybody who's listening that's at that phase can get some benefit from that process.
Absolutely. So we start by looking at who are you moved to create something for?
Mm-hmm.
And I want names. Like I don't want like this imaginary person, but really I want like names, like who they may have been clients you've worked with, they may be people in your life in a different way, but we all have certain people that we're moved to create something for and
Mm-hmm.
help. And I work with them to figure out their niche and to figure out who they're going to say yes to. And that's a hard process because
Yeah.
when we say yes to somebody, we have to close the door on working with absolutely everybody in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And, healers, therapists, coaches, service providers have really big hearts and know that they could work with almost anyone.
Yep.
So it's that first process of okay, let's just keep it to this one pilot offer you're going to create. Who do you want to create this for? It's not a permanent decision. It's much more
Mhm.
like dating than marriage.
Yes.
And that helps people who get kind of panicked around niching. It's like, let's just do it for this. Like, I have a 5-week program. Like, could you
Yeah.
niche for 5 weeks?
Yeah. Well, that piece is so important. Like I just
Hmm.
cannot emphasize enough like what you're saying and this step about figuring out the niche, how tremendously important it is, right? The world of therapy, the world of self-development, of, personal growth like it's so big. It's so
Yeah.
big and so wide open and there's so many things that happen in that space. You have to have an offer, a message, something that is speaking so directly, exactly to your right client that they say yes and everybody else says no, right? To
Hmm.
even have a shot at making that kind of a business a success.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. One of my recent clients, Valerie, or current client, Valerie created So This Is Love. And it's
Mm,
a program, in it is a program for women who are taking a break from dating. In the interest of finding that person, creating that relationship, they're taking a step back from dating. So it's so specific, and it is a really common thing. I feel like I could raise my hand and say I know people in that position.
mm,
I think a lot of us could, but it's a brave thing to say, yeah, I'm going to create something for them, knowing, she could create a program to help everybody. But if you
yeah.
create a program to help everybody,
You don't
it's going to
help it.
be really hard for anyone to feel
Yeah.
seen and understood. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're asking them about who they absolutely love, specific names. What
Hmm.
comes next?
So then they create a program, a pilot program, a very simple program that they can deliver without stepping into months and months of like curriculum development or anything like that. I just
Mhm.
want them to create a simple outline, thinking about, okay, so this is the person. What is the transformation ideally that I'd like to help this person walk through?
Mhm.
And I help them get really specific about that transformation so that then they can create a program that only has what's totally needed to deliver that transformation and nothing
Mm.
extra. Like, we don't need bonuses. We don't need, like, but wait, there's more. It's really a gift. I mean, those may have their place later on, but like for this pilot program,
Yeah.
it's really a gift to keep things simple for the participant. And there's so much information out there that really, where I think the value lies is in the facilitation of, this is the experience to walk you through.
Mm.
So they create a pilot outline, and then the next thing we do together is create a really simple way for people, when they learn about your work, to get on your email list. Just a really simple, I encourage people actually to just, if they're in doubt, don't even create a freebie, because people can get lost in doing that for
Mm.
months at a time. So just start writing weekly emails that are from the heart and are valuable and are sharing what you have to share. So they create a simple website, they create that simple path
Mhm.
into this new business. And then the next step is creating a sales page. And so everybody writes their sales page where they're falling in love with their own offers and they're describing the transformation, really honest and really in the language of their participant, who they know
Mhm.
like nobody else knows.
Mhm.
And then our last step in the this is all happening over 5 weeks. So people are working pretty hard.
Yeah.
At the very end, they write emails announcing their new project to everybody who might benefit, everybody who might know someone who might
Yeah.
benefit. So they just take that brave step of saying, this is what I'm doing, and I'd love you to help me with it. And I would love to get your feedback on it.
Mm. Couple things stand out to me. One is the tight time frame that you're
Mm-hmm.
working in to get
Mm-hmm.
people into motion, actually doing something. I think
Yeah.
that's really significant because I think At least I could imagine, and I know myself from having built online content and automation and all of that, you can get lost in a lot of places along the building path, right? But I would imagine it's challenging to take a therapist who has so much information, like all the ways that they could help somebody, and
Mhm.
condense it down into that bone bare bones approach of like, here's the transformation and only the essentials contained in that deliverable, that course, that program that aid in that transformation. And truthfully, that's how all of our businesses should be. Like, nobody has
Yeah.
time, nobody has extra time for all the
Yeah.
extras that are not necessary. And yet when you get an expert, because these folks are all experts and
Mhm.
people like them, right, are experts, I think it's so easy to put, like, just want to jam everything in there. Just
Mhm.
put it all in, right? I think usually
Yeah.
bare bones is not the natural way. And so, how do your clients do with that process?
They I think they're able to do it because of that tight 5-week timeline. I think that's
Yeah.
one of the ways that it really gets done,
Mm-hmm.
and that they don't have enough time in 5 weeks to create something really complicated.
Yeah.
And I think it also, this is me really geeking out, so I'm not sure about this part, but I think there may be something about a parallel process that's going on where, because they're going through a program that's been really simplified, and they're also seeing all of these other therapists. We always run it in a small group. They're seeing all of these other therapists who have their areas of expertise and magic. That all influences them to be able to see, this is going to be valuable to keep it simple.
Yeah.
And I think maybe another thing that helps is knowing, I use the word experiment over and over again during
Yes.
this. So whenever someone starts to get clenched and is like, but what about this? And how do I not include that? It's just, would you want to run an experiment on doing it really simply? And you may decide you're going to include everything but the kitchen sink next time, but what would this experiment feel like? And that seems to help people kind of like lower their shoulders and
Hmm.
let it go.
Well, that even the language, experiment, or like, and I love in the, the techie world, iterate. Like, this is just
Mhm.
version one. There, there might be version two, three, four, five. Getting people to think more flexibly about it, I think helps them get in motion, because otherwise people get so caught up. And I've worked with so many clients that, so for example, they'll contact me and be like, oh, I'm launching a new online business, a new course, and I'm doing all of the legal terms and the legal protections for them. And but there'll be sometimes some long delays by the time they actually get the thing launched. And
Mhm.
so often it's because they're building it first and they put so much into the building
Mhm.
rather than just launching it.
Mhm.
Make the delivery of it the actual building, right? Building
Yes.
iteration one and
Yes.
then improving upon that. And people that are able to do that, you get so much like real-time feedback.
Yeah.
This you can build and change as you go because you've got live participation, rather than sitting at home creating a really detailed built out course in your head that has no real human involvement yet. I think is really
Yes.
challenging.
It's so hard to guess. It's so unlikely that we're going to get it right the first time. And so, yeah, 100%. I do so strongly encourage people to deliver this first offer live. And that's something that I get pushback on. Some people feel really nervous to deliver it live because they're feeling like it's going to bring up performance anxiety and
Mm-hmm.
it would be easier to record things. I actually think the opposite ends up being true. People are very forgiving about what is being delivered live. They don't expect you to be perfect. They don't expect perfect
Mm-hmm.
lighting or like a lack of little mistakes here and there. They're
Right.
with you. And so
Yes.
I think it's a much lower stress way to deliver something. And then you can just take notes after every session and write down what worked, what did they need more of, where'd you get stuck?
Mhm.
And I totally agree with you. Iteration 2 is always different.
Yeah. Well, and you can record iteration one so
Yes.
that you either have pre-built the content by just, doing it once live in this beta test, or because, and what you say about the level of forgiveness that we have around, a live experience versus, or even watching a recording of a live experience
Yes.
versus like if somebody is sitting here, like imagine me sitting in front of my computer talking and trying to create a course, like the level of expectation goes way up for
Yeah.
the fact that you should be rehearsed and be working from notes or a script or whatever, and I think it's just so much easier to do it live with real people.
Yes, I do too. Absolutely. Yeah. And
So
then eventually you hit that point where there's certain things that you're like, I don't think I want to teach this one more time. I've taught it so many times.
mm,
And then the recording becomes so easy.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, and we learn so much in the delivery of it, whether we
Mhm.
need to change our languaging or somebody has a lot of questions about a particular point that, maybe didn't get enough emphasis or description or whatever. I just think there's so many ways to benefit from that process versus pre-recording, pre-building, etc. I mean, definitely structuring an outline, knowing where you're headed, all of that is very helpful. So I'd love to hear what you hear from your clients on the back end of this 5 weeks, or even after they've launched the thing into the world. I bet you've got some really interesting feedback.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you're asking this now because I just finished a round of this yesterday
Mm.
where everybody wrote these emails and many of them pressed send. Some of them are still editing the emails and they'll go out later this week. And it's like this wonderful experience that somehow like surprises me every time, at least on an emotional level. It's this wonderful experience of watching people be really scared and proud of themselves at the same time.
Mhm.
Of just like, there's part of me that I just hear this every time. Like, there's part of me that wants to quit. This is so scary. And I'm so proud of myself. And I am like, I'm not stopping now. So it's kind of like they've hit that spot where they did some of the hardest, scariest work. And they went through that feeling of like, I'm just going to quit and turn back.
Mm.
And one thing I tell them at that point is like, this will be a moment when many of you will want to quit. Like and I know I've felt that way before, where you're like, okay, why am I doing this to myself? I have a fine business. I have a fine life. Why am I making things so hard for myself? Maybe I should just quit. And like, Netflix is so pleasant. And
This other thing is so
yeah,
easy and routine.
I
Yeah.
know how to do what I'm already doing. Why do something hard?
Yeah.
And so I say, like, you know whether actually it's right to quit, but notice if you're going to be stepping into that regret of like, oh, shoot, like I really cared about that. I was doing something really aligned and I wish I hadn't quit.
Mhm.
And so that's a moment that I see people going through is like, all right, I didn't quit.
Well, and I think the other thing that's really important about that particular part of the transition, that right before you push it out into the world or launch it, like that almost being overtaken by fear in so
Yeah.
many circumstances, so many instances, it is especially true. And the fear is especially strong when it's something we care about so much.
Yes.
And so that's often a sign that you have to push through, because if it was something that didn't really matter to you, there wouldn't be that trepidation. There wouldn't be that hesitance to really put it out there. But because our hearts are wrapped around it,
Yeah.
it becomes an even harder thing to do. And I think it's really important that we say that out loud and acknowledge it, right? Which can often mean people are on the right path.
I so agree. And that's where it seems like that's where imposter syndrome comes up the most
Mm.
is for things that you truly care about. where
Yeah.
you're like, who am I to do this amazing, important thing? And a lot of times, part of what makes you the right person to do it is that you do care so much and you
Yeah.
hold it as a really big honor to do this work.
Yeah. Well, and I think doing that, I mean, it can just be like you say, you get to the end every time and you're surprised, right? This is the joy of doing the work and putting it out there. So
Mhm.
I ran this little experiment during COVID. I started this thing called the Leap Lab. And I like this is way outside what I normally do. I'm an attorney, I help people with legal stuff, but I really wanted to create this space for women to come together every morning at 6 a.m. and do an hour of work together, like deep inner work.
Ooh.
But I've never led anything like this. I had very strong ideas about how I wanted to structure it and la la la, but it was one of those
Mm.
things that kind of niggled at me and I did not it wouldn't go away, and so I was like, okay, I've got to do this. But same thing, like no matter how many times we've launched other things into the world, I feel like every time there's something new that's like a new idea pulling, there's still that same feeling of like, ooh, when I was about to put it out, I was like, what if nobody signs up?
Yeah.
What if all this stuff? And it ended up being so fun. 10 women showed up. It was a paid thing. We ran it for 2 weeks. They had to commit to being there every morning at 6 a.m. for 2 weeks straight, including weekends. There
Ooh.
was no time off. And we got to the end and it was amazing what was accomplished. I had one woman
Mm.
say, I've never gotten up this early, this consistently, and given time to myself like this, like in 30 years.
Mm.
And like I've never led a group like that. This other woman was like, this is the most spiritual experience I've ever had, right? And this kind of that blew me away. I had no idea what it was going to do. I had, very little not a lot of confidence in myself to do what was really in my head that I wanted
Mm-hmm.
to do, right? I think we all have like a very high bar for ourselves.
Yeah.
But what came out of it was just so beautiful. And I think that getting to that side where you're like, oh, I see why this is worth doing and I need to keep doing it, right? Whether it's with each group that you run, whether it's with, iterations of your program. I think that's not really like a bridge that we ever get to the end of. That,
Mm-hmm.
launching something that we really care about out into the world over and over.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't know about you, but my offerings have changed so many times and that iteration never ends. Like it may get smaller, the changes that get
Mm-hmm.
made every time may get a lot smaller,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's really fun to continue to iterate, to continue to look at like how could this be giving even more value? How could the next people benefit from what that group of people just
Mm-hmm.
did and taught me?
Totally. And, I think it's really important that our work grow along
Mm.
with us because there is a point where if your work is stagnant, I think you become stagnant about your work.
Yeah.
And people feel that. They feel less energy. They feel less inclined to say yes to it. So I do think that's a really, really important component of keeping our work alive.
Hmm.
Um, so for folks that have hung on, this has just been such a fun conversation because this process is hard for a lot of people, making this
Yeah.
leap, and yet it's so freeing and I think so rewarding when you can do it, and especially when somebody's holding your hand to help you walk that
Hmm.
path. For folks that are like, gosh, I need to connect with Annie, I need to look into her work, where do you like for them to connect with you?
Well, one place is my podcast, Rebel Therapist Podcast. And that's got a lot of stories of folks who have taken this leap.
Mm.
And you can find that and everything that I do over at rebeltherapist.me.
Love that. Are you on social media at all?
I am. I hang out on Instagram.
Awesome.
And yeah, I love to interact with people over there.
Okay, perfect. I like to ask because, like I hang out on LinkedIn. That's where my people are.
Uh-huh.
So everyone's in a different spot. If you are listening, I'd love for you to check out Annie's website, check out her podcast, check her out on Instagram. We will share those links and anything else that she wants us to share at legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast. Annie, what final thoughts do you want to leave people with today?
Well, I do have also a workshop if you want to dive in and learn more about like, well, how do I get started with this whole pilot
Mm,
program thing? And should I go ahead and say that URL?
totally. Yeah,
Okay, so
absolutely.
that's also rebeltherapist.me/beyond. And that
Yes.
is free for you. Um, and okay, what else do I want to say? I just want to encourage you to run experiments, hold it lightly,
Mm,
and allow yourself to get started. So if you're finding yourself kind of hiding and waiting, I know it might sound corny, but life really is short. So start an experiment. Know that you can always pivot, you can always change your mind, but starting is really important.
I love that. Yes, my final note on that because starting, I think for many people is often the hardest thing, actually making the choice to walk down a different path. And
Mhm.
I remodeled this house that I'm in years ago. It was before the market crashed, and my intent was to flip it. And there were so many projects. Every day I was tackling a new project that I did not know how to do. And I knew because I had set a schedule, like I knew exactly what the timeline was going to be and when I had to complete certain things. And so I had this sign hanging like, just start. Um, what is it? Just begin. Oh, I can't even remember the quote, but it was like, just begin or just start. Like the rest of it will come, right? It was something
Yes.
like that, like just start. You don't have to know the end points, right? And I think so often we want to know those end points before we even begin. And it's like, no, just start. It's the hardest, but it's so important. The rest of it will come.
It will come. I love that. If we knew how hard some things were,
Yeah,
we might not have started them. So we just need to start.
that's also true. Well, Annie, it's been so fun to connect with you today. I'm excited to be able to share your work and send people your way. I hope we have the chance to talk again.
Me too. This was so much fun. Thanks so much,
Awesome.
Heather.
Thank you for being with us.